Epidemiological Anthropology. Epidemiological Anthropology is Unit 9.8 in Paper 1, Anthropology. Unit 9.8 in Paper 1, Anthropology, that is Epidemiological Anthropology. Epidemiological Anthropology. Right now we are in the middle of a pandemic, isn't it? Pandemic, epidemic, whatever you call it. So now we are very much familiar with all these terms like what is epidemic, pandemic, quarantine, isolation, vaccination, isn't it? There's no need. Some 2 or 3 years back when I used to take these classes, these terms were new to the students. When we say pandemic or epidemic, they were like, what exactly does it mean? But now it's not a new term for us anymore, isn't it? You can find any person on the street, any layman, very commonly using these terms, saying what is, in fact, they give us more knowledge about what is epidemic, what is pandemic, what is vaccination, what is first dose, what is second dose, what is a booster dose, what are the precautions used to follow, and what we mean by isolation, quarantine, everything, even there are self-acclaimed doctors, WhatsApp gurus giving us so many medications.
Then it will become red. If it is not starting again, disconnect it to open the OBS again.
Ask her to get some water. So we have these self-acclaimed gurus on WhatsApp and all social media, FB, YouTube, everywhere, giving their own versions of treatment for COVID and so on, so on. We have been through it. It's almost hopeful, I'm just hoping that at least COVID is over by the end of at least 2022. It completely ruined 2020 and 2021. At least let's all pray together that at least by 2022 it must be over and we cannot go ahead with this kind of lifestyle anymore. Fine. So we know about pandemics, though we are going through one of the worst pandemic right now, that is COVID. Prior to that, have you heard of any pandemic or epidemic which has caused huge scale destruction and which has caused loss of lives in several thousands and lakhs? Do you know any of such pandemic in the earlier ages prior to COVID? So how many of you have heard about the Black Death of Europe? Black Death of Europe. So the Black Death of Europe is one such pandemic which ravaged the entire Europe in the 14th century, that is between 1347 to 1351. So prior to the COVID which we are undergoing right now, if there was one pandemic which created which ravaged the entire Europe, and it was one of the worst pandemic in the entire world, that was this Black Death. So in the entire history of humankind, one of the worst pandemic the human beings have witnessed in the human history was Black Death prior to COVID. So now we have COVID. Okay, so prior to COVID, one of the worst pandemic which human history has witnessed is Black Death. So Black Death happened in the 14th century between 1347 to 1351, and it took a greater toll on life than any other known pandemic until recently. Okay, so how did this originate? So how did this originate? Again, whether fortunately or unfortunately, even the Black Death originated in China, and it is said that, how many of you have heard of Crimea? Isn't it? Crimea was news in some 3 to 4 years back, and even every now and then it is in news. So what happened is, even the Black Death originated in China and Inner Asia, and it managed to move into entire Europe through the Mediterranean Sea to the countries in the northern African continent, and then further it moved to Sicily, Italy, France, Germany, okay, Netherlands, all these countries, and finally it even managed to move up to UK, London, and even countries like Denmark, Sweden, Baltic countries. It managed to enter into entire Europe, and it is said that this Black Death managed to wipe out 40% of Europe's population. Will you believe it? There were thousands of villages in Europe which got vanished because of this single epidemic called Black Death, and that is why it is called as Black Death, isn't it? And it managed to wipe out around 40% of Europe's population. So where did it begin? Actually, it originated in Crimea, and then what happened was there was this king called as Kipchak Jani Beg. So this person, what he tried to do was he wanted to capture the trading port of Kaffa. So earlier it was called as Kaffa, but now it is called as Feodicea. I'll just show you on the map. After 20 minutes will change. So you can see this is Feodossia. Oh, the map is very blur. So it originated in Feodossia here, which was called as the Kaffa earlier. So that was a trading port. Here in this region, the map is very much blurred. Just give me a minute. Map. Some more. So here you can see it originated in this place called as Kaffa or Feodossia. This place you can see here, and then what happened was this person called as Kipchak Jani Beg, he managed to capture the port of Kaffa. This is a port town which is now called as Feodossia, and he tried to capture this port town, and when he could not outgrow or when he could not do that successfully, what he did was, in order to take revenge on the enemy group, he threw some corpse infected with malaria. Okay, sorry, not malaria. He plague infested corpses. So people who have got plague and they have died, right? So he took those dead bodies and he threw it here in this region, in this port town, when he could not succeed in capturing Feodossia. Then what happened was, all the ships which were traveling from this port to other regions in Europe carried the infection with them, and that is how they managed to spread into entire Europe. So from this region, Feodossia, they moved into Mediterranean, the ships moved into Mediterranean Sea. So this Feodossia port town, that is a port town of Kaffa, is in Black Sea, and from there it managed to move into Mediterranean Sea. You can see here. So it managed to move into Mediterranean Sea, this region, and from there it entered into the North African countries and further into Spain, Italy, Bulgaria, Greece, okay, even France. And further it also managed to move up to England, London, and Scandinavian countries, and even the Baltic countries also. So it went on up to Denmark and all these Baltic countries like Norway, Finland. So it managed to move further north. So during this process, there were several villages, several thousands of villages. 22. So there were several thousands of villages which got washed away by this epidemic or the pandemic. Okay. So it is said that totally around 25 million people in Europe died from plague because of this Black Death alone. So around 25 million people in Europe perished because of this Black Death pandemic. 20. Then have you heard of any other epidemic which caused huge fear and panic in our country prior to COVID? So I'm sure you must have all heard about the Surat plague, isn't it? No, still less. Yeah, fine. So I'm sure you must have all heard about Surat plague, isn't it? So the Surat plague happened in 1994. So the Surat plague happened exactly during the time of just before, some 1 month before Diwali celebrations. So we know that Surat is the hub. It is the hub for textile industries, and it is during this season that they have the maximum revenue that is generated. So however, what happened when Surat, the entire town got plague, the entire town of Surat was quarantined and people were not allowed to move in and out of the town. And further, the antibiotic, that is the tetracycline is an antibiotic which is used to treat the plague. So this also started reducing. So there was very much less quantities of tetracycline, as a result of which people started panicking, and many people, including doctors and pharmacists and other people, they started hoarding tetracycline, and they also started escaping out of Surat city in order to avoid getting plague. And what they did was this infection even started moving up to Delhi, Bombay, and it is said that during that time, if you ask any of our parents, it created so much of fear, not just in this region of Surat, Delhi, Bombay and all, even up to entire south. Even the southern states were entirely gripped with fear of plague. The schools and commercial establishments were closed for a long time, and then people started moving out of Surat. The entire town of Surat was in a quarantine state, so people could not enter in and out of that. Still, many people managed to escape, and they were caught hold in bus stations and railway stations, and even internationally, many people started fearing. And it is said that this Surat plague alone led to a loss of around $250 million US. Can you imagine in 1994 what would have been the worth of $250 million? So because Diwali season is very important, and Surat being a textile hub, that is the prime time when they do maximum of their sales and revenues generated. And at this particular peak time when the revenue has to happen, when the entire town was infested with plague, it led to huge business losses, not just nationally but internationally also, as a result of which it is estimated that around $250 million US worth losses happened during the 1994 Surat plague. It is not just this, people started fearing to come out of their house, schools were shut, entire country was gripped in fear. That was the condition. So if you want to know more about this, you can ask your parents who lived during this generation. So they will be able to tell you more about this, isn't it? So it is similar to what is happening now in COVID. So now by the time of COVID second wave and second year, we are a little bit relaxed because most of us have taken 2 dosages of vaccines, or most of us have already got COVID. So kind of relaxed. But imagine, can you imagine how much fear we had in the first wave, during the first wave, right? So every school, colleges and offices were shut down. We were scared to come out, even speak with anyone wearing a mask. We could not go to shops or buy anything. So what kind of fear we had in the very beginning, isn't it? So that was it, how it was during the Surat plague also. And then how many of you all have been to Charminar? So can you tell me what is the background of constructing the Charminar? Let me see how many of you will be able to answer that. Okay, so we know very much about what is pandemic, epidemic. So Black Death is one of the worst pandemic human history has ever witnessed prior to COVID. Okay, so then nationally, if you see, Surat plague one was was one such devastating pandemic, and then now we are right now in another great pandemic called COVID or SARS-CoV-2. Fine. So here in epidemiological anthropology, I have given you a bulky notes. So first and foremost, as soon as you downloaded the material or you took a printout, you must be worried. What is this? There's so much of material, so many diseases. Should we read so much? So please, there's a disclaimer. Do not panic. Okay. First and foremost, but the intention of me giving you such bulky notes for this chapter is because it will also help you in your general studies. So here we have a list of various diseases, that is communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, and diseases caused by virus, bacteria, protozoan, fungi, and then sexually transmitted diseases, occupational hazards, okay, lifestyle related diseases. So under each category I have discussed many diseases over here, and these are very important, which even high school students know and even which any common man should know. So definitely these diseases, what are the symptoms, what is the causal organism, all this will definitely help you either in your preliminary examination or in your main examination as well. So for anthropology per se, you need not know so much about all these diseases. I will just tell you what you need to know. See, because it will help you in your general studies also, I have given you such a bulky material, giving you a list of many diseases caused by various bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and so on. So under each category, what you need to know is, say the diseases caused by bacteria. So under the diseases caused by bacteria, you must know some at least 3 to 5 diseases. That will be sufficient. And then disease caused by virus. Under that, you need to know some 3 to 5 important diseases. That will be sufficient, and there won't be any need for you to memorize this entire material. But as a common person, it is very useful to know what are the various diseases, what is the causal organism, whether it is caused by bacteria, whether it's caused by virus, what is the mode of transmission. So all these are very common information which we need to know, and that is why I gave you all of this material. Okay, so do not panic looking at the bulky material. You just need to know some 3 to 5 diseases caused by each category of pathogen, that is either virus or bacteria or fungi or protozoan or lifestyle diseases and so on. Got it? Are we together? See, many of you all are giving me answers about the history of Charminar. I'm not asking you about the history of Charminar. Charminar was constructed to commemorate something. So what is that? Let me see how many of you will be able to tell me. Okay, so let's start by beginning the discussion with what is the classification of diseases and so on. So under diseases, we have congenital diseases and acquired diseases. So what are congenital diseases? Congenital diseases are the ones which we acquire since the time of a birth, isn't it? You must have seen many children are born with some birth defects. Say they will have some problems with their heart or some problems with their kidney. So they are born right from the birth, they have these diseases, that is called as congenital diseases. And then we have acquired diseases. Acquired diseases are the ones which we acquire after our birth, isn't it? So you know what is the difference between congenital diseases and acquired diseases. Then we also have communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases. Under communicable, we have contagious or communicable or infectious diseases, which we can call. So under infectious diseases, we have contagious and non-contagious. Contagious and non-contagious. Contagious and non-contagious. Under contagious, we have examples like hepatitis, dengue, HIV, syphilis, okay, TB, leprosy, and so on. Under non-contagious, we have examples like malaria, cholera, typhoid. Okay. Then further, we have the non-infectious diseases or the lifestyle-related diseases. So under non-infectious diseases, we know very common diseases like diabetes mellitus, isn't it, which common man calls it as sugar, isn't it? We people, or even sometimes, just randomly, even we call sugar. We say sugar when we are speaking to people who don't understand what it means to say, what it means when we say diabetes. We say, do you have sugar? Right? Do you have BP? Actually, BP means we say it as hypertension. But in common terms, you can see many old people saying, I have sugar, I have BP, isn't it? So these are all the lifestyle diseases, and also even cancer also can be considered as among the non-infectious diseases. So now we should start discussing the diseases caused by various organisms one by one after the other. First, we should start discussing the diseases caused by bacteria. So the diseases caused by, so now I'll tell you what all you need to know under each disease. So first, say we are discussing about cholera. You need to know what disease cholera is. First, under that disease, what all you need to know. First, what is the causal organism? So disease cholera is caused by a bacterium called as Vibrio cholerae, right? So that you need to know. Then what is the mode of transmission? So here it is transferred to through contamination of food and water, and the house fly is the carrier over here. Then what are the symptoms, and what are the prevention and what are the treatment options that is available? So under each disease, see, if you go on studying each and every disease in depth, you can study like a microbiologist. So what exactly properly what happens inside the body during this disease, so which exact organism, what family it belongs to, what genus it belongs to, and what are the proper symptoms, how to identify, like how a doctor will identify. So like that you can go too much into depth also, but that is not required to go so much into depth for as part of our anthropology syllabus. So these are the important points which you need to know for any disease. Keep this in mind. First and foremost, what is the causal organism? Okay, whether it is a bacteria or it is a virus or a fungi, and which organism it is. Say now I am telling you about cholera. So here the causal organism is a bacterium. It is Vibrio cholerae, right? So what is a causal organism? Next you need to know what is the mode of transmission. Mode of transmission, that is how the infection happen and how it gets transmitted from one person to another. That is the what we mean by mode of transmission. And then next you need to know what are the symptoms, okay, how you can identify this disease, that is called as symptoms. Then is there any prevention, is there any cure, and is there any treatment options for that? That is the fourth point. So prevention, okay, and cure, and what is the treatment options available for this. So much if you know for each disease, that is more than enough. So under bacterial diseases, some 4-5 or 3 to 5 important diseases. Under viral diseases, some 3 to 5 important diseases. Under each disease, you need to know the causal organism, mode of transmission, symptoms, and then the last point, which is prevention, cure, and what are the treatment options available. Can we study so much? It isn't too difficult, isn't it? Fine. So cholera is caused by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae, and it is transmitted through contaminated food and water, and here the carrier is the housefly, right? Then typhoid. Typhoid is again a disease caused by the bacterium. Typhoid is also a disease caused by the bacterium Salmonella typhi, and here also the mode of transmission is through food and water. Then coming on to typhoid is a non-communicable disease, isn't it? Typhoid is non-communicable. And then moving on to leprosy. Leprosy is caused by Mycobacterium leprae. Mycobacterium leprae. So leprosy, earlier days, if you see, it used to be a disease which was largely stigmatic in the society. People used to shun going close to people who are having leprosy and so on. But now it is not much. But even till today also you can find there are special hospitals for leprosy patients because they have the skin problems, and it is a communicable disease that if you have contact with them, then there are chances that you also will get the disease. That is why it was such a social stigma to get this disease in earlier days. So it affects the skin, and the infected areas lose sensation. Okay, and if you have prolonged contact with the person who is affected with leprosy, there are chances that you might also get leprosy. Okay, then comes tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is another lethal disease which is communicable. That is why you can see that mostly when you go to any hospitals, you will not find any department for tuberculosis or any particular, like in regular hospitals, you can find different departments or different, specialists, be it cardio or be it for kidneys or be it for liver and so on. But most of the time you can find that tuberculosis patients will not be entertained in those hospitals. For tuberculosis alone, we have special hospitals, isn't it? Why is it so? Because tuberculosis is a communicable disease which is caused by the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and how it gets transmitted is through airborne, that is through coughing, sneezing, okay, through sputum. If a person, suppose you are with a person who is infected with tuberculosis, and suppose they cough or sneeze or through their sputum, there are chances that you might get the infection, and it is very lethal. Right? That is why we have special hospitals for tuberculosis. And if at all, if you go to meet any patient in a tuberculosis hospital, they will not allow you, just like how they will allow you into a maternity ward or any other cardiovascular, if a person has had some heart disease. So there's no precautions that you need to necessarily take. You can just go visit a patient and come. But that is not the case when you are entering into a tuberculosis hospital. They will give you a lot of protective gear before you go and meet the patient. So if any of you all have visited any tuberculosis hospital, I'm sure you will know about that. So they'll give you a proper mask, and mask now, after COVID, it has become a part and parcel of our life, but prior to that it was not, isn't it? So even at that time, when anybody wants to go to a tuberculosis hospital or visit patients over there, they will be given a lot of protective gear so that they do not get infected by tuberculosis when they are meeting the patient. That is why we have separate hospitals for tuberculosis exclusively. And then it is also said, and one more thing about tuberculosis is the patients have to be given medication continuously without missing even a single dose. So they will be given they will be given drugs which they should not miss, and that is why once a person is identified having tuberculosis, they will be asked to shift to the hospital, and they will be given treatment in the hospital itself, and it's very rare that they will be given treatment in the home. So what happens is, it is said that you should not have contact with them because it is a communicable disease, and it very easily you can also get the disease. However, some 2 years back, I read the statistics that at least one person in every 1,000 in our country has tuberculosis, and they're freely roaming around everywhere else, and even we do not know about that, right? So there is a very high possibility for us also to get the infection. Next, moving on to diphtheria. Diphtheria is caused by the bacterium Diphtheriae and leptospirosis. Okay, now moving on to plague. So before we start discussing plague, let's take a small break. Plague, which is also a communicable disease, it is caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. Yersinia pestis, and it is a communicable disease. And under plague, we have two kinds of plague, that is the pneumonic plague and the bubonic plague. So pneumonic plague is occurrence of pneumonic plague is very rare, so it has a very less occurrence. However, it is more serious and the infection happens in the lungs. Okay, so pneumonic plague, though it is of less occurrence and it rarely occurs, however it is very dangerous because it infects the lungs and it is more serious condition, whereas bubonic plague is pretty common and it is highly communicable. It spreads very fast from one person to another, and it mainly affects the lymph nodes. Okay, so you can see the two different plagues, that is pneumonic plague and bubonic plague, and both of them are communicable in nature. And so in here also you can find that there are various symptoms like fever, chills, weakness, vomiting, nausea and so on, and the treatment options include providing antibiotics, okay, and disinfection practices and so on. So first and foremost, do you know one important thing about antibiotics? So now we are speaking, since COVID, there's a lot of awareness among people about various medications also. Until now also, even still some people are very much ignorant. So say for example, you get fever and after 1 or 2 days it does not subside, and you go visit a doctor or a hospital, you consult a doctor in a hospital or in a private physician. So they will prescribe paracetamol tablets, and if you have still cold and all, they will prescribe some more other tablets, and in addition to that they will also prescribe basic antibiotics, isn't it? So what will happen, initially 1 or 2 days you start taking all the tablets as and how the doctor has prescribed, and after 1 or 2 days your fever reduces. So now you are feeling better and you start going back to work or college or everything, and you stop taking antibiotics. But actually whenever a doctor prescribes antibiotics, they will prescribe it at least for a minimum duration of 3 days or 5 days or more than that, isn't it? Have you noticed this? They will say for 5 days at least minimum. In some antibiotics, they'll say take it for 3 days. Usually they'll prescribe it for morning and night. So one tablet in the morning after food, one tablet at night after food. So like that they'll ask you to continue the antibiotic for 3 days or 5 days, or in some cases even more number of days. But what happens, many people, once the fever subsides or when the symptoms become less, they will discontinue the paracetamol tablets also, and at the same time they will discontinue taking the antibiotic also. But one important thing which you have to keep in mind is, you can still discontinue the paracetamol tablets, but you should never ever discontinue the antibiotic tablets. Whatever the entire course of antibiotics that the doctor has prescribed, you have to take it completely, be it for 3 days or 5 days or 7 days or 9 days, how many ever days the doctor has prescribed it, you have to complete the full dosage. Okay, so what will happen if you do not continue the full dosage? If you leave it midway, or if you discontinue the tablets, or if you skip the tablets while taking the dosage, what happens is your body starts developing resistance against that particular antibiotic. So next time when you get fever or you become sick and when you go to the doctor, and if he gives you the same range of antibiotics, that is at that same level of antibiotic, it will not work on you. So now the doctor will be forced to prescribe a much stronger level antibiotic. Okay, did you understand? So this is what we mean by antibiotic resistance. So even we have studied so much about the multi-drug resistance, isn't it? That is multi-drug resistance in Delhi. So one case was identified. So all those stories I think you know. If not, I will tell you all those in the next class. Okay, so there was this multi-drug resistance, beta-lactamase. A huge name was given. We'll discuss that in the next class, don't worry. So this is what happens when you discontinue or if you do not complete the total dosage of the antibiotics prescribed. So henceforth, I don't know how many of you knew this earlier or if you are knowing it now. Henceforth, whenever your doctor prescribes antibiotics, do not skip it midway. You have to complete the entire dosage. And it is also a common practice that whenever you go to a doctor for some sickness, they have to prescribe the lower level of antibiotics first. And then if that does not work, then after that, if that suppose that entire dosage you take and it does not work, then only the doctor will prescribe a much higher level antibiotic. And even if that doesn't work, then they'll go for further antibiotics. But whatever, nowadays it is becoming a common practice among doctors also. So what they are doing is they want to give quick remedies. Even patients want quick remedies, isn't it? Say we get fever for one day, we do not have patients to see, for 3-4 days and then recover and then get back to work or college or anything. We instantly want remedies. We want to become normal very soon. So as a result of which nowadays even doctors are prescribing higher level antibiotics in the first stage itself. So what happens because of that? Next time when you become sick, your body will not function for that antibiotics, and they have to keep on giving you much stronger antibiotics every single time. Okay, so this is what happens. So please, whenever you become sick also, please have some patience. Okay, most of the time it is said that the body becomes sick when it needs rest. So rest is the most adequate thing which we need when we become sick. Beyond tablets, beyond other medications, everything, an adequate rest itself helps in curing most of the problems, isn't it? So even with COVID also, when COVID happened also, there is actually no proper treatment for COVID, right? They can only give you paracetamol tablets for fever, and if you have a runny nose, if you have cold, they can give you some tablets for that like cetirizine. And apart from that, they will ask you to have good food so that your immunity will improve. They'll prescribe you zinc tablets and vitamin C tablets because vitamin C definitely improves the immunity. So all these are they are not actually the proper treatment for COVID, right? They're not. We are not targeting the COVID virus, but these are all tablets which they prescribe us to reduce the symptoms which we are facing, right? Are we together? Fine. So now we shall move on to diseases caused by the viruses. Chickenpox. So chickenpox is again a communicable disease. I'm sure all of us in our lifetime, at least once we have got chickenpox, and mostly we'll get chickenpox during summer time, isn't it? So when we have a summer holidays, definitely once or twice in a lifetime, all of us would have got chickenpox. So we know what happens. The chickenpox is caused by the Varicella virus or a chickenpox virus, and here also you get red color rashes all over your skin, and usually you'll be asked to stay in a separate room in the house and take more of buttermilk and juices, fruit juices, and so that the body is always food. We are given food like curd rice or fruit juices or buttermilk, so that the body has a cool environment, right? And foods which does not generate heat in a body, and foods which are difficult to digest. So such kind of food they'll give, and the patient will be kept in isolation. And most of the times you must have noticed, so in one locality, if one child gets chicken pox, almost all the children in that in that area or in that street or in that locality, at least once they will get chicken pox in that season, right? Fine. Then we have poliomyelitis. So polio has been successfully eradicated from our country, isn't it? We have been successful in that. But earlier days, polio used to be very common, and many people used to get polio. And then only they started the oral polio vaccine, which is administered even now. So all the kids below the 5 years of age, they have been administered the oral polio vaccine. Is it given twice a year or thrice a year? Can any of you recall and tell me? Right? So any kids, right from 1 month old kid up to 5 years, they will be administered oral polio vaccines, which is given free of cost by the government, isn't it? So in all hospitals and even the pharmacies and even primary healthcare centers, everywhere polio vaccine is administered. So this is also caused by the polio vaccine. Next, moving on to hepatitis. See, hepatitis is very dangerous. We have hepatitis, 5 kinds of hepatitis, isn't it? Hepatitis is again a communicable disease, whereas polio is non-communicable, right? Polio is a non-communicable disease and hepatitis is a communicable disease. So in hepatitis we have A, B, C, D, E, 5 types of hepatitis, out of which hepatitis B is said to be dangerous, quite dangerous. And how many of you know that our very famous star Amitabh Bachchan has hepatitis? Do you know how he got hepatitis? And do you know that Amitabh Bachchan is surviving with just 25% of his liver? Okay, so what happened was, in Amitabh Bachchan's case, during the 90s when he was shooting for this movie called as Coolie, I forgot the name, I forgot the year. The movie name is Coolie, but I forgot the year exactly when he was shooting for that. And when he was trying to do some stunt, he missed the stunt and he fell from a he fell from a height, and he had severe injuries. And there was severe loss of blood during that incident, and he was admitted to the hospital. And because of the severe loss of blood, lot amount of blood was transfuted to lot amount of blood transfusion was done to him. So there were donors, several donors who gave blood, and out of one of them, probably one of those donors had hepatitis B. So what happened? They took blood from several donors and they transfused it to Amitabh Bachchan ji. And then he also lived normally. He didn't know that he got infected by hepatitis B. And somewhere around 2000 or 2002, when once he went for some entire total body checkup, usually they do that, right? Even for elders at home, after 35 or 40 years of age, once in a year, it's advisable for them to go for a complete checkup. So including their sugar levels, their BP, so the heart functioning, kidney functioning, and many tests are there, right? So usually they advise people after 35 or 40 years of age to go for a complete total body checkup every year, isn't it? That's called as master checkup. So is one such time in 2000, early 2000 or 2002, when Amitabh Bachchan went for a test like this, they identified that he had got hepatitis B, and already 75% of his liver had got damaged. So by then only 25% of his liver was functioning, and from then on he's continuously taking tablets and other medication and steroids to maintain the functioning of that 25% of the liver. So in one interview he told that, see, I am a person who's surviving with only 25% of liver. So it is possible. There have been, and one more important thing is, it completely goes unnoticed. Hepatitis B, you do not find any symptoms at all until a major damage is caused. Only in the later part you get to know. And same is the case with cancer also, isn't it? Many times cancer is treatable. You can give chemotherapy and various other treatment options, and it is successful only when you give the treatment during the stage 1 or stage 2. But in many cases you can find completely the patient does not show any symptoms at all, and finally when some sort of symptoms occur and they go to a hospital and get the test done and confirmation that it is cancer, they are already in stage 4 cancer and it is the last stage, and that becomes very, very sad, right? So fine, hepatitis. Hepatitis is caused by the hepatitis B virus, and here it is mainly transmitted through blood and body fluids. Okay, and even jaundice. So I'm sure many of you know about jaundice. So even in jaundice, what happens is the liver functioning is disturbed. Right. So what is the liver responsible for? Liver, the secretions of the liver are responsible for the secretions of the liver and the gallbladder enter into the digestive system, that is the large intestine, and they are responsible for digestion of the food that we eat. So it is not that all the digestion happens in the stomach itself. See, the process of digestion actually begins in our mouth. Okay, saliva itself helps in breakdown of the food. So that is why it is always advisable to eat slowly. But what do? We never have time, be it for breakfast or lunch or dinner. We are always in a rush. We just gulp down food like anything. Actually, that causes a lot of stress of the digestive organs in our body. So what we digestive process actually starts in the mouth itself. That is why we have to take in food. We have to chew it very well. And then finally, some part of the digestion happens in the stomach. And then finally, major part of the digestion happens in the intestine. So it is these... there are secretions of the liver and the gallbladder which enter into the digestive system, and they are responsible for breakdown of the food. So the carbohydrates are broken down. So all the food that we eat is either composed of carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, vitamins, minerals, and so on, right? So carbohydrates are broken down into glucose units. Finally, the glucose is broken down to final product is ATP. Right? In the cell, the glucose is broken down to ATP, which ultimately gives us energy. If not, it is converted to fat and it is stored. So we have this process called as glycolysis, gluconeogenesis, and so on, which happens at the cellular level. We need not study so much in depth, don't worry. So, and proteins are broken down into amino acids, and then fats, the lipids, that is whatever we consume, that be it ghee, oils, cheese, mayonnaise, right, paneer, all these fat rich foods, they are also again broken down to fatty acids. And the secretions from the liver are very much essential for breaking down of the fats. Okay, so that is what happens when a person is suffering from jaundice or from hepatitis. What happens is the liver does not produce adequate quantity of these hormones, which are not hormones, we can call it as secretions. So in case of jaundice, what happens is the liver does not produce enough amount of this secretions which are responsible for the breakdown of fats. So what happens when the person is consuming normal food, however the liver is not functioning properly and it is not producing the secretions properly, then the fatty food does not get digested, as a result of which the person starts vomiting. So vomiting is a very common symptom among jaundice patients, isn't it? Also the bile pigments, that is bilirubin and biliverdin. Bilirubin and biliverdin, which are the bile pigments, isn't it? These two pigments also, when the liver is not functioning properly, when we have jaundice, these two pigments also increase, the concentration of these two pigments in the blood increase, as a result of which we get yellow coloration on the skin. So you can find yellow discoloration of the skin. You can also find yellow color in the sclera of the eyes, that is the white part of the eyes, right? That also becomes yellow, and you can find a discharge of too much of yellow color in the urine. Right? So all these are very common symptoms of jaundice, and that is why when you get jaundice, the doctors will advise you not to add oil or other fat-rich foods in your diet. They will suggest you to go for very simple foods and not take in much of fatty foods or oil-rich foods, because the liver is not capable of producing the secretions which are responsible for the breakdown of the fats. And when the fats are not broken down but you're still consuming it again and again, it is thrown out of the body in the form of vomiting, right? So that is a common symptom in jaundice. So for during jaundice, again one more important thing is people who are suffering from jaundice should not consume alcohol, liquor. Right? So some people are there, doctor will advise them not to consume liquor, and even after getting jaundice, if they still continue the consumption of liquor, it becomes fatal and they finally succumb and even die. So I know one such person who was very young, in his early 20s, and he got jaundice, and he was an alcoholic, and he could not control or stop the consumption of alcohol, and finally he had to die because of jaundice. So that is why it's very important. Jaundice is also quite a serious condition which should not be ignored. And very clearly we can see the symptoms like yellowness in the sclera of the eyes, yellowness in the fingernails, yellowness in the skin. Okay, and then when you can with proper medication, it can be cured. And most importantly, along with medication, proper food, proper diet is very important. So once you once a person has got jaundice, he is not supposed to take liquor or fat rich foods and so on. Are we together? Are you following? Fine. So in hepatitis also you can find these symptoms like enlarged liver. Okay, and for hepatitis B we have vaccination even in our country. So it is advised, well, many times doctors will advise that we can take hepatitis vaccine. Actually we have vaccination for many diseases, but it's very common. It's not commonly, we don't know much about that, and we don't take it very commonly, isn't it? So even for cervical cancer also there's vaccination, and it is advised, many women are advised once they cross the age of 30 or 35, many times doctors advise that it's better to take vaccination for cervical cancer also. Fine. Then moving on to dengue. 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 Fine. So again we know about dengue, right? So it is caused by the mosquito bite, and among mosquito we have three kinds of mosquitoes, right? The Anopheles mosquito, Culex mosquito, and what's the other one? Aedes mosquito. So which is the one which causes dengue? Hope you are able to recall. There are three kinds of mosquitoes, right? Anopheles mosquito. So it is a female Anopheles mosquito which usually causes the disease. Okay. No, here in case of dengue it is Aedes. Okay. So we have Anopheles, Culex, Aedes. So it is the Aedes mosquito which causes dengue fever, right? Aedes aegypti. So it is this Aedes mosquito which is active during daytime, right? Anopheles, female Anopheles mosquito is active during night time, whereas the Aedes is active during daytime. And it is again, dengue fever is characterized by onset of sudden high fever, headache, pain in the eyes and so on, and pain in the joints and muscles, isn't it? I'm sure all of you would have got dengue fever at least once. So even chikungunya, right? So when we got chikungunya, we used to get severe pain in the knuckles and joints, isn't it? So then moving on to rabies. Rabies is again a non-communicable disease. So how do you get rabies? Rabies you get by the dog bite. How many of you all have got bitten by dogs? And how many of you all have taken that injection around your navel? See, nowadays the number of injections have reduced a lot. So now I think they administer some 1 or 2 injections if you get a dog bite, that's all. But earlier during the 90s, that was not the case. So that time if you get a bite from a dog, they used to administer around 5 or 7 or 9 injections every day around the navel. And it used to be so painful, right? So here the pathogen is rabies virus, and how it gets transmitted by the biting of a rabid dog. So how do you identify if a dog is rabid? Many times if you see on the street, you can identify the rabid dogs. They will have a lot of saliva coming out of their mouth. So they'll be salivating a lot. That is a rabid dog. So next time whenever you identify a rabid dog, stay as much as away from them. Okay, because it's very dangerous if they come and bite you. Then we have anti-rabies injections. Okay. Then moving on to influenza. Influenza, which is also commonly called as common flu, isn't it? Influenza, which is called as flu commonly, and that is also caused by the virus, and the infection happens in the respiratory tract. So there are many strains of influenza virus. Okay. And again here the symptoms include fever, respiratory tract infections, headache, or running nose, and all these things. And then now moving on to Ebola. So I'm sure all of you know Ebola, right? So Ebola occurred after few days or few months after SARS-1. See, we had SARS-CoV-1 which happened in China. After that, within few months, there was the eruption of this Ebola in African countries, in the Central African countries. So here during Ebola also many people died. So this is mostly transmitted through blood and body fluids. There was people were isolated, and even the doctors and nurses who treated them, they also succumbed to the death. Okay, so Ebola is again a viral disease. It is called as Ebola hemorrhagic fever. Okay, the outbreak happened in Central African countries. And here also this is again a zoonotic disease. You understand what's the meaning of zoonotic diseases, right? So which were the organisms which are present in the animals, and then from animals it got transmitted to the human beings. These are zoonotic diseases. Here again the transmission happens through blood, secretions, organs, other bodily fluids, okay, from surfaces and materials which are contaminated from these fluids. So healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, several people who were treating the patients who got Ebola, they also succumbed to the diseases. And even the burial ceremonies did not involve people participating, because it was a communicable disease. The number of people participating were restricted, and they were not allowed to have any sort of contact with the dead body or the corpse, right? So here again we have symptoms like fever, fatigue, muscle pain, and so on. And the diagnosis is through ELISA. What is ELISA? ELISA is enzyme linked immunosorbent assay. So ELISA test is also used in the detection of HIV. Okay, HIV which causes AIDS. So there also ELISA is used, and again RT-PCR. So we all know RT-PCR. So much we have every day we keep speaking about RT-PCR since the time of COVID, isn't it? So RT-PCR is reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction. So don't worry, in another chapter we will be discussing about immunological methods, biochemical methods, and so on. There we will be discussing in depth about what is RT-PCR, what is polymerase chain reaction, how it happens, and so on. Fine, but you know ELISA, isn't it? ELISA, it is an antibody based reaction that is used in the detection of this Ebola. It is also used in the detection of HIV, and even in the pregnancy test. Okay, I'm sure now everybody knows what is a pregnancy test, how it is done. We have this kind of pregnancy kit where you'll have a window over here. So when a woman, if she wants to know if she is pregnant, if she has conceived, then she can do this test, and if she gets 2 lines, I think it is, then she is pregnant, or 1 line, 2 lines means positive, that is she is pregnant, and 1 line means negative. So even again this is also based on ELISA. Fine. Good. Then moving on to SARS. SARS-CoV-1 we know, which originated in China, and then now we are all going to SARS-CoV-2. So we all know more than what is material in this what is mentioned in these materials now, isn't it? So again SARS-CoV, that is also a communicable disease. There is we have so much of knowledge about that Overnight, if somebody wakes you up in your sleep and asks you to write about SARS-CoV, you will write pages and pages. You can write an essay on that, isn't it? Now moving on to STDs or sexually transmitted diseases. STD or sexually transmitted diseases. The first one among that is AIDS, that is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So AIDS is not a disease. Keep this in mind. AIDS is not a disease, it is a syndrome. So here a person doesn't, after getting AIDS, he does not die out of a particular disease. Say AIDS is a particular disease and these are the symptoms. No, it is not like that. It is a syndrome. So what exactly happens here in AIDS is, because of the HIV infection, the virus directly attacks the immune system. So the immunity of the person will become very low and he becomes susceptible to any infection and he can die out of any infection. Okay, so in normal people, what happens is we have a strong immune system. So even if we get any infection by any microorganisms, our body has the capability, our immune system has a defense mechanism to combat that microorganism and make us survive. However, in case of HIV patients, that is AIDS patients, what happens is their complete immune system is suppressed. Okay, because it directly attacks the immune cells. The human immunodeficiency virus directly attacks the immune cells itself, and because of which their immune system gets suppressed and they become susceptible to any infection, and that can lead to their death. Fine. So we all have studied so much about what are the symptoms, what is the mode of transmission of AIDS. Okay, a widely used diagnostic test for AIDS is ELISA, that is enzyme linked immunosorbent assay. Then again syphilis. Syphilis is again a STD, that is a sexually transmitted disease, and it is also caused by a bacterial infection which is spread by sexual contact. Then it is caused by a bacterium called as Treponema pallidum. Syphilis is caused by a bacterium called as Treponema pallidum. Okay. Then moving on to some diseases caused by protozoans. So amoebiasis. Amoebiasis is, you must have seen patients with amoebiasis, right? They have the swollen legs. That is amoebiasis. It is caused by the pathogen which is a protozoan called as Entamoeba histolytica, and it is also a non-communicable disease. Then moving on to malaria. Malaria is caused by the Plasmodium vivax. Plasmodium vivax. Isn't it? So here it is the female Anopheles mosquito which is the responsible for the transmission of the malaria. Then we have again diseases caused by worms like filariasis. Filariasis again non-communicable, which is caused by the filaria worm, and it is also transmitted by the bite of the mosquito, Aedes mosquito and Culex mosquito. Then we have non-communicable diseases, or which we can also call it as lifestyle related diseases. First one among that is diabetes mellitus. Diabetes mellitus is pretty common, especially among Indian population, right? So you can find most of the elders at home in any families, if they are above the age of 50, they will have a diabetes mellitus, and nowadays it is becoming common even among the younger age group people. Earlier they used to check for diabetes whenever when the patient is above the age of 45 or 50 years of age. But nowadays, even when some patients go to the doctor with some problems, they'll ask them to go for a diabetes checkup. Okay, so even recently when I was sick also, when I went to the hospital, they asked me to go for all these blood tests to test blood sugar levels and everything. So nowadays, because it's becoming pretty common, you can find even people or youngsters also getting diabetes very commonly. Even people in 30 years of age, in their 30s, and some cases have been there where even in 20s they are getting diabetes. Some people as early as 23, 24, 25, in early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s also, they are getting diabetes. That is because of the change in our lifestyle and because of the enormous stress which we are taking, isn't it? So recently somewhere I read that